The wind over Konoha didn't just howl, it whispered secrets to the boy with eyes like shattered moonlight. Naruto Uzumaki didn't possess the mischievous blue gaze the villagers were accustomed to. Instead, his irises were a haunting, pearlescent lavender, ringed with faint, concentric ripples that aimed to pull at the very fabric of reality. He sat atop the stone head of the fourth Hokage, not as a prankster looking for attention, but as a silent sentinel watching a world that felt increasingly like a glass cage. His skin was unnaturally pale, almost luminous under the midday sun, and small, bone-like protrusions had begun to bud beneath the hairline of his forehead, hidden by a frayed Hittite. While the other children played ninja in the dirt, Naruto felt the pull of the stars, a genetic yearning for a throne he had never seen in a harvest he didn't yet understand. He wasn't just a container for a beast, he was a relic of a celestial dynasty, a dormant god walking among mortals who mistook his divinity for a curse. The transition had begun on his 12th birthday, the day the seal didn't just hold the 9 tails, but began to dissolve into it. In the white void of his subconscious, Naruto didn't find a giant fox behind bars. He found a towering, ethereal figure with flowing white robes and horns that swept back like frozen lightning. The fox, Kurama, wasn't snarling, it was whimpering, coiled at the feet of this spectral presence. "You are not a vessel of the Uzumaki," the figure had hissed, its voice echoing like grinding tectonic plates. "You are the fruit of a forgotten branch, the scion of Otsutsuki." Since that night, Naruto's chakra hadn't been the bubbling red heat of the fox, but a cold, suffocating gold that made the air around him vibrate with high-frequency static. He stopped eating ramen and started craving the raw energy of the atmosphere, often found sitting in deep forests where the plants would wilt and blacken in a perfect circle around him as he unintentionally drained their life force to feed the growing hunger in his marrow. The Chunin exams weren't a competition for Naruto, they were a systematic revelation of his terrifying evolution. When he faced Neji Hyuga, the prodigy of the all-seeing eyes, the stadium fell into a deathly silence as Naruto simply raised a hand, and the very gravity in the arena shifted. Neji's gentle fist didn't just miss, it hit an invisible, impenetrable barrier of compressed space-time that sent the Hyuga spiraling backward with shattered wrists. Naruto didn't move a muscle, his expression one of detached curiosity rather than anger. "Your eyes see the flow of energy," Naruto remarked, his voice devoid of its former rasp, sounding instead like melodic crystalline bells. "But my eyes see the architecture of the universe itself." As he spoke, a third eye, a vertical slit of crimson with 6 black tomo, ripped open on his forehead, casting a bloody hue over the terrified spectators. In that moment, the third Hokage realized that the boy wasn't the village's ultimate weapon, he was an apex predator from a dimension they couldn't even comprehend, and the will of fire was nothing more than a flickering candle compared to the supernova brewing in Naruto's veins. As the Konoha crush began, Naruto didn't defend the village, he ascended above it, drifting into the sky without the aid of jutsu or wings. Gaara, in his mid-transformation as the Shukaku, looked up in primal fear as Naruto reached into the air and pulled out a rod of pure, black truth-seeker energy. With a flick of his wrist, the landscape didn't just explode, it ceased to exist, replaced by a vacuum where the sand and the invaders were simply erased from the timeline. He looked down at the burning village with eyes that no longer recognized home, seeing only a collection of primitive biological matter. The Otsutsuki blood had finally overridden his humanity, turning his heart into a cold engine of cosmic efficiency. He realized then that he was never meant to be Hokage, he was meant to be the end of the world's cycle. As the moon began to glow with an eerie, responsive light, Naruto stood alone in the heavens, a pale god ready to reclaim the planet that his ancestors had planted so many millennia ago, leaving He Shinobi world to tremble in the shadow of its new, celestial master. The air in the forest of death didn't just feel dangerous, it felt subservient. As Naruto stepped through the dense foliage, the predatory insects and giant leeches didn't attack. They withered, their life force pulled into the shimmering, golden aura that now acted as his second skin. Team 7 followed behind him in a daze, Sasuke's pride crumbling with every step as he watched Naruto's hair turn a translucent, ghostly white. The Uchiha's Sharingan burned with frustration, unable to track the way Naruto moved, not through speed, but by seemingly folding the distance between 2 points. When they finally encountered Orochimaru, the Sannin didn't see a boy. He saw the ultimate prize, a biological jackpot that defied the laws of ninjutsu. But as the snake Sannin lunged, Naruto simply blinked, and the space around Orochimaru's arms crystallized into jagged shards of red glass. There was no hand sign, no shout of a technique name, there was only the silent, terrifying exercise of a will that outranked the gods of the shinobi world. Deep within his psyche, the remnants of Naruto's human soul fought a losing battle against the encroaching tide of ancestral memories. He saw flashes of dying stars, of white-clothed giants devouring the energy of entire civilizations, and of a lineage that viewed the earth as nothing more than a nursery for a singular, divine fruit. The Nine Tails, once the ultimate terror of the leaf, was now nothing more than a battery, its mass. IV chakra being refined and purified into the high-density energy required to fuel an Otsutsuki's ascension. Naruto could feel the karma mark beginning to spread across his chest like an intricate, black tapestry, etching the history of 1,000 cosmic conquests into his skin. He looked at Sakura, and for a fleeting second, he felt a pang of human warmth, a memory of a crush and a team. But the feeling was quickly drowned out by a cold, mathematical realization: she was a mortal, a creature of dust and fleeting time, while he was becoming the eternal silence of the void. By the time the final rounds of the exams commenced, the atmosphere in Konoha had shifted from festive to funereal. The village elders sat in the shadows of the cage booth, whispering about containment and sealing, unaware that their primitive ink and paper rituals were like trying to cage a hurricane with a spiderweb. Naruto stood in the center of the arena, his presence so heavy that the stone floor beneath his feet began to crack and liquefy into a dark, obsidian-like substance. He no longer wore the orange jumpsuit of a loudmouthed orphan. He was draped in a cloak of manifested chakra that flowed like liquid silver, and two horns now protruded clearly from his temples, curving upward like a crown of bone. When the proctor signaled the start of the match, Naruto didn't even look at his opponent. He looked directly at the sun, his eyes reflecting the solar fire, and whispered a single word in a language that predated the creation of the moon. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the stars became visible in the middle of the day, signaling to everyone watching that the Naruto they knew was dead, and the king of the stars had arrived to collect his tithe. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted only as long as it took for Naruto to close his fist. As he squeezed his fingers together, the atmospheric pressure within the stadium skyrocketed, pinning every spectator and shinobi to their seats with the weight of a mountain. Jiraiya, watching from the stands, felt a cold sweat break out across his brow. The prophecy had spoken of a child of destiny who would either save the world or destroy it, but he had never imagined a power that existed entirely outside the cycle of hatred. Naruto began to levitate, his body glowing with a radiance that made it impossible to look at him directly. "This world is a garden," he announced, his voice vibrating through the very bones of everyone present, "and it has grown wild. I am not your savior, nor am I your enemy. I am the harvester." With a wave of his hand, a massive rift opened in the air behind him, revealing a glimpse of a barren, white dimension filled with the husks of worlds past, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the people of the 5 nations felt the true, icy terror of the divine. The silence that followed Naruto's proclamation was heavier than any physical weight, a thick, suffocating blanket that seemed to swallow the very screams of the terrified masses. In the cage booth, the disguised Orochimaru felt a sensation he hadn't experienced in decades: genuine, paralyzing trepidation. The power radiating from the boy wasn't just large, in the way a tailed beast's chakra was. It was fundamental, as if the laws of physics were bowing in the presence of their architect. Naruto turned his gaze toward the Hokage, and for a moment, the third saw not the grandson figure he had tried to protect, but a cosmic judge. "Sarutobi," Naruto said, the name sounding foreign on his tongue. "Your will of fire is a beautiful delusion. You burn wood to keep the dark away, never realizing that the dark is infinite." As he spoke, the black rods floating behind him began to spin, creating a centrifugal force that stripped heat tiles from the stadium roof and ground them into fine, gray powder. The sky above Konoha began to ripple like the surface of a disturbed pond. Great, jagged tears appeared in the blue expanse, leaking a pale, ethereal light that bathed the village in an otherworldly glow. Naruto raised his right arm, and the karma mark on his palm glowed with a blinding, sapphire intensity. "The harvest began with the mother," he whispered, a reference to Kagaya that sent a chill through the hidden archives of the village's memory, "but the fruit was never plucked. I am the realization of the design." He didn't need to weave signs or mold chakra, he simply reached into the air and pulled. Suddenly, the ground beneath the village groaned as massive, white roots, thick as ancient oaks and glowing with a faint, bioluminescent pulse, burst through the streets. These weren't the wood-style constructs of the first Hokage, they were the fingers of the god tree, reaching out to reclaim the energy that had been borrowed by humanity for centuries. The chaos of the invasion vanished, replaced by a singular, desperate struggle for survival. Shinobi from both Konoha and the Hidden Sand found themselves standing side by side, not as enemies, but as prey. Jiraiya leapt into the fray, his hair lengthening as he summoned the great toad sages, but even their senjutsu, the energy of the earth itself, seemed to flee from Naruto's presence. Naruto, stop this! The toad sage roared, his voice cracking with a mixture of grief and horror. Naruto looked down, his lavender eyes devoid of malice, containing only a terrifying, clinical detachment. You speak to a ghost, Jiraiya, the boy replied, his form flickering as he teleported instantly to the center of the stadium. The one who sought your acknowledgement was a dream dreamt by a dying lineage. I have woken up. With a simple gesture, the air around Jiraiya solidified into a vacuum, snuffing out his fire-style techniques as if they were mere matchsticks in a hurricane. As the god tree's roots began to entwine around the great stone faces, the very history of the shinobi world started to dissolve. The faces of the Hokage crumbled into the abyss, their legacies literally turning to dust under the pressure of the Otsutsuki's presence. Naruto stood at the epicenter of this transformation, his body becoming more translucent with every passing second, as if he were turning into pure light. He watched as the villagers below fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, their chakra being gently, systematically siphoned away to fuel his final evolution. There was no blood, no screaming, just a quiet, terrifying transition from a world of conflict to a world of stasis. It is peaceful, is it not? Naruto asked the empty air, his voice now a chorus of 1,000 ancestral echoes. The cycle of hatred ends not with a handshake, but with the return to the source. I am the end of your story, and the beginning of a silence that will last for eternity. Quote, the atmosphere over the village grew thin, as if the oxygen itself were being claimed by a higher authority. Naruto began to drift toward the center of the sky, his silhouette haloed by the dying light of a sun that seemed to be losing its luster. Below him, the legendary Sannin and the elite Jonin were reduced to mere ants scurrying in the shadow of a boot. Kakashi Hatake, his Sharingan spinning in a desperate attempt to perceive the source of Naruto's power, fell to his knees as the sheer density of the golden chakra crushed his lungs. The boy, no, the entity, looked down at his hands, which were now porcelain white and tipped with blackened claws. He could feel the thoughts of everyone in the village, not as individual voices, but as a low-frequency hum of electrical impulses that he could flick off like a switch. The hunger in his core had evolved from a physical craving to a metaphysical necessity. He wasn't just hungry for food, he was hungry for the very essence of existence. With a slow, deliberate motion, Naruto spread his arms wide, and the space behind him tore open into a massive, crimson portal that bled the scent of ozone and ancient dust. Out of the rift stepped dozens of shadow-like constructs, each shaped like a twisted version of the boy he used to be, but made of pure, unstable dark matter. These were his guardians of the harvest, extensions of his will that moved with a terrifying, tearing speed, phasing through solid walls and human bodies alike. As they moved through Konoha, they didn't kill, they merely touched, and the person would collapse, their physical form turning into a small, glowing seed of chakra that floated back toward Naruto. He watched the process with a cold, analytical eye, noting how the will of fire tasted bitter and frantic compared to the calm, steady rhythm of the natural world. He was no longer bound by the morality of men. He was the gardener, and the garden was finally being pruned of its excess. Sasuke Uchiha watched from the wreckage of the Uchiha district, his eyes bleeding from the strain of staring into the divine radiance above. His quest for vengeance, his hatred for Itachi, and his desire for power all felt like toys left behind by a child. In the face of Naruto's celestial heritage, the Uchiha legacy was a footnote, a minor mutation in a grander, more terrifying bloodline. Naruto landed softly a few feet from him, the ground not even crunching under his weight. You seek the truth of your clan, Sasuke, Naruto said, his voice echoing from the sky rather than his mouth. The truth is that you are a distant echo of my kin. You are a shard of a mirror that I have finally put back together. He reached out a hand, and for a moment, Sasuke saw the boy who had once competed with him for the top spot in the academy. But that boy's face was now a mask of marble, his eyes two swirling galaxies that promised only the peace of The end. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the moon didn't rise. Instead, Naruto himself became the light source for the world. The god tree's roots had now fully encased the hidden leaf, turning the once vibrant city into a massive, ivory cocoon. Naruto felt the 9 tails within him dissolve completely, its consciousness finally merging with his own to create a singular, focused intent. He looked up at the stars, seeing the distant flickers of his brothers and sisters waiting in the deep dark for the signal. He was the vanguard, the scout who had found a world ripe for the taking, and his report would be written in the ashes of the shinobi era. "It is finished," he whispered, and as the words left his lips, a pulse of white light erupted from his body, expanding across the continent in a silent wave. Every fire went out, every blade of grass turned to silver, and the world of ninja fell into a deep, celestial sleep, waiting for the harvest that Naruto, the Otsutsuki king, had finally brought to fruition. The silence that followed the great pulse was not the absence of sound, but the presence of something absolute. Across the elemental nations, the frantic machinery of war and politics simply ground to a halt as the white wave washed over the horizon. Naruto remained suspended in the air, his form now completely detached from the physical world. His skin had become a matte, alabaster shell, and his robes were woven from the very darkness of the interstellar void, shimmering with the ghosts of nebulae. He looked down at the ivory cocoon that was once Konoha and felt a strange, lingering vibration in his chest, a phantom limb of a heart that no longer beat. It was the memory of a promise made to a girl with a forehead protector and a boy with a vendetta. To the Otsutsuki mind, these were mere glitches in the software of divinity, but to the fragment of Naruto that remained, they were the anchors preventing him from drifting into the cold eternity of his kin. With a thought, the black rods behind him reconfigured, forming a circular halo that burned with a pale, cold fire. He began to descend, his feet touching the top of the god tree's highest spire. The wood was warm, pulsing with the stolen life force of thousands, a rhythmic thrumming that felt like the planet's own panicked heartbeat. Naruto closed his eyes and reached out with his consciousness, his mind expanding until he could feel the individual dreams of every person caught in the ivory web. He saw their desires, peace, love, power, and found them tragically small. He realized that by turning them into seeds of energy, he wasn't just killing them, he was elevating them into a state of perfection where they would never again know the sting of loss or the hunger of ambition. He was the ultimate altruist, providing a mercy that the human mind was too primitive to understand, yet the Naruto within him still wept in a language he had forgotten how to speak. The sky cracked open once more, but this time, it wasn't Naruto's doing. 2 massive, crystalline pillars descended from the rift, slamming into the earth with the force of falling moons. From the dust emerged figures that mirrored Naruto's new form. Momoshiki and Jinchuriki had arrived to claim the fruit they believed their lesser scout had prepared for them. They looked at the ivory-wrapped world with greedy, pale eyes, their laughter sounding like the grinding of glaciers. "You have done well, vessel," Momoshiki sneered, his voice dripping with a condescending venom. "The harvest is rich, and the fruit will be magnificent. Step aside so we may begin the refinement." Naruto didn't move. He stood atop the god tree, his 3 eyes narrowing as he looked at these gods of his lineage. In that moment, the human part of him and the Otsutsuki part found a terrifying common ground. They both hated being told what to do. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the air, but it didn't come from a fox. It came from the very space Naruto occupied. "This world is mine," he said, and the authority in his voice caused the 2 intruders to stumble. "I am not your vessel, nor am I your servant. I am the apex of this branch." The red eye on his forehead flared, and the truth-seeker orbs expanded into massive, jagged blades that hummed with the frequency of a dying star. Momoshiki's face contorted in rage, but before he could even raise a hand to absorb the energy, Naruto was there, his hand clamped around the celestial's throat. The speed was so absolute it made time seem irrelevant. Naruto didn't just want to protect the world he had put to sleep, he wanted to consume the ones who dared to claim his prize. As he began to drain the essence directly from Momoshiki, Naruto realized his new purpose. He would not be the harvester of men, but the executioner of gods, a lone celestial predator guarding a silent, silver garden. The sky didn't just darken, it bruised, a deep and sickly violet that bled into the horizon as the 2 celestial invaders realized they weren't facing a subordinate, but a mutation. Momoshiki's golden eyes widened, the arrogance draining from his pale features as Naruto's grip tightened, his fingers sinking into the otherworldly flesh of the god, like heated needles into wax. Jinchuriki lunged, his massive red energy halberd swinging with enough force to cleave a continent in TW. Oh, but Naruto didn't even turn his head. A single black rod manifested from the air itself, intercepting the blow with a sound like a thunderclap that shattered every window still standing in the ruins of the leaf. The shockwave leveled the remaining ivory spires, but Naruto stood immovable, a pillar of absolute, cold reality in a world of shifting energy. He wasn't fighting like a ninja, he wasn't even fighting like a man. He was simply deleting the resistance that his kin offered, his third eye spinning with a rhythmic, hypnotic malice that seemed to paralyze the very atoms of his opponents. You speak of refinement, Naruto whispered, his voice now a layered chorus that sounded like wind howling through a graveyard of stars. But you are nothing but parasites, wandering the void for a taste of what I have already mastered. As he spoke, the karma mark on his arm didn't just glow, it caught fire with a white, ethereal flame that began to flow upward, coating his skin in a suit of crystalline armor. Momoshiki screamed as his own chakra was reversed, sucked out through his throat and into Naruto's palm in a torrent of raw, blue light. The great harvester was being harvested. Naruto could feel the eons of memories trapped within Momoshiki, the countless worlds extinguished, the billions of lives compressed into tiny, glowing pills. It was a banquet of suffering, and as Naruto consumed it, his own humanity finally flickered out like a candle in a vacuum, replaced by a hunger that was no longer biological, but existential. Jinchuriki let out a roar of grief and desperation, his body swelling as he attempted to turn himself into a pure energy pill for his master to consume. But Naruto was faster, his hand releasing Momoshiki's withered throat only to catch the massive warrior by the crown of his horns. With a sharp, jagged motion, Naruto tore the energy from the air itself, collapsing Jinchuriki's form into a dense, singularity-like sphere of crimson power. He didn't offer it to Momoshiki, he brought it to his own lips and swallowed it whole. The explosion of power that followed didn't make Naruto bigger, it made him more compact, more terrifyingly efficient. His hair lengthened until it brushed the ground, glowing with a soft, bioluminescent hum, and his skin turned a shade of white so pure it looked like polished bone. He turned back to the trembling Momoshiki, who was now crawling backward across the bark of the god tree, his divinity stripped away to reveal a pathetic, shivering creature of ego. Please, the celestial stammered, a word that had likely never crossed his lips in 1,000 years of cosmic travel. Naruto looked down at him, his lavender eyes reflecting not mercy, but a vast, empty boredom. The cycle you started ends here, Naruto said, his hand glowing with the combined might of 3 Otsutsuki bloodlines. I will not plant trees. I will not wait for harvests. I am the end of the line. He closed his fist, and the space Momoshiki occupied simply vanished, folded into a dimension of non-existence where not even a memory of the god remained. Naruto stood alone atop the world tree, the ultimate predator in a silent galaxy. He looked up at the void, seeing the faint, distant flickers of other kin, who might one day come searching for their lost brothers. Let them come, he thought, his heart a cold stone of cosmic intent. He would be waiting here, the pale king of a dead world, ready to turn the hunters into the hunted until the stars themselves went out. The silence that followed Momoshiki's erasure was not peaceful, it was a vacuum, a hollow ache that stretched across the atmosphere like a drum skin pulled too tight. Naruto stood at the zenith of the god tree, his white robes fluttering in a wind that no longer carried the scent of pine or rain, the metallic tang of ionized ozone. He looked down at his hands, which were now tracing patterns of light in the air without his conscious command, creating tiny rifts in reality that hissed like dying embers. The power of 3 celestial beings surged through his meridians, a torrent of raw data and ancient memories that threatened to wash away the last sandcastles of his childhood. He remembered a swing set, the taste of cold miso ramen, and the warmth of a sun that didn't feel like a battery, but these memories were graying, becoming like old photographs left out in the rain. He was no longer a boy who happened to be a god, he was a god who was struggling to remember why he had ever wanted to be a boy. The god tree beneath him began to pulse with a new, frantic rhythm, its roots burrowing deeper into the tectonic plates of the planet. Naruto could feel the earth groaning, the very core of the world cooling as its heat was siphoned upward to feed his insatiable evolution. He realized with a detached, clinical horror that his presence alone was a death sentence for the world he had once sought to lead. The will of fire had been replaced by a will of the void, a gravitational pull that demanded everything and gave nothing back. He looked at the horizon and saw the great nations not as lands of people, but as sectors of biological energy waiting to be processed. The Otsutsuki instinct was a parasite of the soul, a directive written in the language of the stars: consume, evolve, ascend. Every time his heart, or the crystalline organ that had replaced it, thumped, another square mile of the planet turned into a salt-white wasteland, its life force converted into the pale gold mist that clung to Naruto's skin like a shroud. A flicker of movement near the base of the tree caught his third eye's attention. It was a shadow, small and defiant, dragging itself through the ivory roots. It was Kakashi, his mask torn and his breathing a ragged, wet whistle. The silver-haired shinobi wasn't trying to fight, he was simply trying to reach the boy he had failed. Naruto descended, not by falling, but by deleting the distance between the canopy and the ground. He landed a few feet from his former teacher, his presence so heavy that the air around Kakashi began to liquefy into dark, viscous beads. Naruto, Kakashi gasped, his voice barely a thread of sound, look at what you've become. Naruto tilted his head, a gesture that was eerily avian, his lavender eyes scanning Kakashi's DNA, seeing the cellular decay, the flickering spark of a life that was already forfeit. I have become the answer to your prayers, Kakashi, Naruto replied, his voice a polyphonic resonance. I have ended the war. I have ended the hunger. I have ended the humanity that caused you so much grief. Quote. He reached out a finger, touching the forehead of the man who had taught him the value of teamwork. At the contact, Kakashi's mind was flooded with the entirety of the Otsutsuki archives, the birth of galaxies, the death of suns, and the terrifying realization that the human experience was nothing more than a microscopic blink in a blind universe. Kakashi's eyes went wide, not with pain, but with a sudden, devastating clarity before he slumped forward, his body turning into a fine, iridescent dust that the wind carried away. Naruto stood in the center of the ruins, the last witness to a civilization that had been erased by its own savior. He looked up at the stars, which now seemed closer, more vibrant, as if they were welcoming him home. He realized then that his work on Earth was finished, there was nothing left to harvest, nothing left to protect. With a slow, graceful movement, he stepped into the air and began to walk upward, his footprints leaving burning scars on the fabric of space, heading toward the deep dark where the rest of his kind waited to see what kind of monster the child of prophecy had truly become. The ascent was not a physical climb but a spiritual dissolution, a shedding of the atmospheric weight that had tethered Naruto to the terrestrial mud for 13 years. As he breached the exosphere, the vibrant blue of the planet's veil faded into the stark, uncompromising black of the cosmos. Behind him, the earth looked like a marble of cracked ivory, its vibrant greens and deep blues replaced by the sickly, pearlescent sheen of the god tree's silk. Naruto didn't look back with regret, he looked back with the clinical curiosity of a sculptor observing a finished, albeit discarded, piece of clay. His lungs, once desperate for the oxygen of Konoha's forests, now pulled in the thin, cold radiation of the suns, filtering the solar winds through his crystalline veins. He was a creature of the vacuum now, his white robes billowing in a wind that didn't exist, his third eye scanning the light years ahead for the next source of sustenance. The karma on his skin began to pulse with a rhythmic, golden light, acting as a beacon for the rest of the Otsutsuki clan scattered across the myriad dimensions. He could feel them now, not as individuals, but as a collective consciousness of hunger, a grand hive mind that had existed since the first star ignited. They were calling to him, questioning the anomaly of his birth and the ferocity with which he had consumed his own kin. Naruto didn't answer with words, he answered with a surge of power that rippled through the gravitational fabric of the solar system, a declaration of his sovereignty. He was no longer the fox boy, or the hero of the leaf, he was a celestial stray who had devoured his masters and inherited their throne. The void was no longer empty to him, it was a tapestry of energy, a buffet of celestial bodies waiting to be harvested by the pale king who had outgrown his world. Far beyond the reach of human telescopes, a massive, obsidian palace floated in the rift between realities, the seat of the Otsutsuki High Council. Naruto appeared at its gates not through a portal, but by simply deciding to be there, his presence causing the ancient stone to groan and crack. The guards, towering beings with horns that swept back like ivory scythes, didn't move to stop him, they sensed the density of the soul fruit he had consumed and bowed their heads in a primal acknowledgement of his rank. Naruto walked through the halls of the elders, his footsteps echoing like the ticking of a doomsday clock. He reached the central chamber where the king of the stars sat upon a throne made of compressed dwarf stars, his eyes fixed on the newcomer. You are the one born of the human vessel, the king vibrated, his voice a sound that could shatter glass. You have brought the harvest of the blue world, yet you smell of its dirt. Naruto looked up, his lavender eyes devoid of the fear that should have consumed a mortal in this place. He raised a hand, and the miniature suns that illuminated the hall flickered and died, their energy snuffed out by his sheer proximity. I am not a vessel, Naruto stated, and for the first time in eons, the king felt a tremor of uncertainty. I am the end of your lineage. I have tasted the will of fire, and the will of the void, and I find both lacking. He didn't come to join the council, he came to dismantle the factory of gods. With a sharp, jagged motion, Naruto unleashed the Truth Seeker orbs, which expanded into massive, spinny rings that began to grind the obsidian palace into stardust. He wasn't just an Otsutsuki, he was the correction in their code, the predator that would ensure the stars remained silent. As the palace collapsed into the abyss, Naruto stood at the center of the wreckage, alone, pale silhouette Agai. NST the backdrop of an infinite, darkening universe, ready to start the harvest of the gods themselves. The collapse of the High Council was not a battle of techniques, but a fundamental rewriting of celestial law. As the obsidian palace dissolved into shimmering grains of dark matter, Naruto stood suspended in the pressurized silence of the rift, his white robes untouched by the debris of a falling empire. The Otsutsuki king, a being who had outlived galaxies, attempted to weave a rift of his own, reaching foe. The raw fabric of space to fold Naruto into non-existence. But the boy from the leaves moved with a fluidity that bypassed the physical. He was no longer traveling through space, he was the space itself. With a single, fluid strike, Naruto's palm connected with the king's chest, and instead of an explosion, there was a terrible, hollowing sound. The king's divine essence didn't dissipate, it was pulled into the karma mark on Naruto's hand, a golden whirlpool that drank the wisdom and power of a mill. Ion years in a heartbeat. As the last of the council elders flickered out like dying embers, the Naruto that had once played in the dirt of Konoha felt a final, agonizing snap. The bridge between the human orphan and the cosmic predator had finally burned away, leaving only the cold, crystalline eye. Intellect of an apex being. He looked at the vast, sprawling network of the Otsutsuki, the thousands of nursery worlds currently being drained by his kin across the multiverse. He could feel their tethers, their umbilical cords of chakra stretching across the dimensions like a spiderweb of light. To any other member of his race, this was a map of wealth. To Naruto, it was a list of targets. He realized that the only way to truly end the cycle of the God Tree was to become the fire that consumed the forest. He closed his eyes, his three-eyed gaze peering into the very fourth dimension, and began to chant in a frequency that vibrated through the atoms of every living soul in the cosmos. The great extinction of the gods began not with a bang, but with a universal shiver. Across 1,000 worlds, Otsutsuki harvesters looked up from their growing trees, their pale faces contorting in confusion as their own karma marks began to glow with a hostile, sapphire light. Naruto had turned their own genetic code against them, acting as a viral consciousness that broadcasted a single command: return. One by one, the celestial invaders began to dissolve, their bodies turning into the same iridescent dust that had claimed Kakashi, their power flowing back through the dimensional rifts toward a single point in the void. Naruto sat at the center of this cosmic storm, a black hole of golden chakra, absorbing the collective might of an entire species. He grew neither larger nor more monstrous, instead, he became more transparent, his form becoming a silhouette of stars, a living constellation that held the weight of a trillion stolen lives within a single, human-shaped frame. When the last of the Otsutsuki had been reaped, Naruto found himself alone in the absolute dark of the rift, the only light source in a graveyard of a civilization. The god trees on 1,000 planets withered and died, returning the stolen energy to the soil, allowing the gardens of the universe to grow wild and free once more, unburdened by the shadow of the harvesters. Naruto looked at his shimmering, translucent hands and knew he could never go back. He couldn't return to the earth, his mere presence would ignite the atmosphere, and his footsteps would crush the tectonic plates. He was the ultimate weapon with no war left to fight, a god with no worshippers. With a final, lingering thought of a red fan crest and a pink-haired girl, he curled into a meditative posture in the heart of the void. He would become a silent sentinel, a dormant sun at the edge of reality, ensuring that no other gods would ever rise to claim the fruit of the living. The story of Naruto Uzumaki ended not with a throne, but with a sacrifice, a pale king guarding the peace of a universe that would never even know His name. The silence of the void was not a vacuum to Naruto, it was a symphony of data, a celestial radio frequency that he alone could tune into. As he drifted in the pressurized stillness of the rift, the stolen power of the Otsutsuki High Council began to settle into his marrow, turning his skeleton into a lattice of pure, white-hot energy. He no longer felt the passage of time in seconds or hours, but in the slow, rhythmic pulses of distant quasars. His mind, once a chaotic storm of human emotion and foxfire, had flattened into a mirror-still lake of cosmic calculation. He watched the birth of a star 3 galaxies away with the same detached interest he might have once shown a falling leaf in Konoha. The karma on his skin had evolved, the black ink-like patterns now glowing with a soft, bioluminescent gold that pulsed in sync with the expansion of the universe. TSELF. He was the anchor of a new reality, the single point of gravity around which the ghosts of his past and the potential of his future now rotated in a delicate, dangerous dance. With a flick of his wrist, Naruto tore a seam in the fabric of the dimension, peering back into the lower world he had left behind. He saw the earth, a pale and scarred marble slowly beginning to heal from the trauma of the god tree. The white ivory roots were turning to dust, releasing the trapped souls of the shinobi into a world that no longer had a hierarchy of power to define them. He saw the faces of those he once called friends, now mere flickering sparks of biological electricity in the vast dark, and felt a strange, phantom ache in the center of his chest. It wasn't sadness, for an Otsutsuki has no use for grief. It was a remnant of a program, a legacy of the will of fire, that refused to be fully deleted. He realized that while he had saved them from the harvesters, he had also orphaned them, leaving them in a universe where the gods were real, silent, and terrifyingly close. The realization sparked a final, defiant transformation. Naruto didn't just want to be a sentinel, he wanted to be the architect of a safeguard that would outlast even his own celestial lifespan. He began to weave his fingers through the dark matter of the rift, pulling threads of raw space-time tog ether to create a massive, invisible barrier, a shroud, that would mask the life signals of the remaining nursery worlds from any other wandering predators of his kin. He poured the collective knowledge of the High Council into this veil, creating a labyrinth of dimensional folds that would redirect any interloper back into the cold emptiness of the void. As he worked, his physical form began to blur, his porcelain skin dissolving into a mist of golden atoms that spread across the rift like a cosmic spiderweb. He was literally stitching himself into the boundaries of the universe, sacrificing his individuality to become the very laws of physics that would protect the small lives he had once belonged to. By the time the shroud was complete, the entity that was Naruto had become a whisper, a faint resin. Ants in the background radiation of space. He was no longer a person, but a phenomenon, a guardian spirit woven into the dark between the stars. He settled into the heart of the rift, his consciousness expanding until he could feel the breath of every living creature on earth, a billion tiny heartbeats acting as the rhythm for his eternal meditation. He knew that one day, perhaps millions of years from now, humanity might look up at the stars and wonder why the universe felt so quiet, so protected. They would never know about the boy with the lavender eyes who had consumed his own divinity to give them back their sky. In the absolute dark of the final dimension, the pale king closed his eyes for the last time, a ghost of a smile touching lips made of starlight, finally finding the peace that he boy in the orange jumpsuit had chased through the dust of 1,000 battlefields. The silence in the rift was not empty, it was pressurized with the weight of 1,000 harvested civilizations, a physical density that Naruto now wore like a second skin. He sat cross-legged in the center of the non-existent space, his white robes flowing in a static current of pure information. His third eye, the crimson slit on his forehead, remained open, but it no longer scanned for enemies. Instead, it projected a holographic map of the multiverse, a shimmering web of golden ley lines that represented the life force of every planet he had shielded. He could feel the pulse of the earth, a faint, rhythmic thrumming, and the more frantic, jagged vibrations of younger worlds just beginning to develop their own primitive forms of energy. He was the silent conductor of a cosmic orchestra, adjusting the gravity of a star here or the atmospheric pressure of a moon there, ensuring that the garden grew without the need for a gardener's cruel shears. The stolen memories of the Otsutsuki High Council continued to settle, but they no longer threatened to drown his humanity. Instead, Naruto had compartmentalized them, turning the genocidal history of his kin into a library of what not to do. He saw the faces of the kings he had consumed, Momoshiki, Ashiki, and the nameless elders, and used their ego as a whetstone to sharpen his own humility. He realized that the greatest trap of divinity wasn't the power, but the isolation. To combat this, he began to project tiny, microscopic fragments of his consciousness back into the mortal realms, not as avatars or gods, but as whispers of intuition. A sudden flash of insight for a young scientist on a distant world, a surge of courage for a terrified medic in the ruins of a war. Torn city, Naruto became the unseen hand that tipped the scales of fate toward survival, a ghost in the machine of the universe that preferred the shadows to the spotlight. As the eons began to bleed into one another, the physical form of the Pale King started to undergo its final, most radical change. Naruto was no longer made of flesh, bone, or even the refined white matter of the Otsutsuki. He was becoming a being of pure, coherent light. His body stretched and thinned until he resembled a constellation more than a man, his limbs tracing the boundaries of the dimension he guarded. He realized that to truly protect the universe, he had to become the very vacuum that separated the stars, a protective void that swallowed the malice of any remaining celestial predators before they could even perceive a target. He was the ultimate filter, a cosmic immune system that had learned to distinguish between the healthy growth of a civilization and the parasitic hunger of a god. He looked at his hands one last time, seeing the faint, ghostly outlines of the whiskers that had once marked his cheeks, and felt a profound sense of completion. The Naruto, who had once shouted his name from the rooftops of Konoha, was now a foundational constant of physics, a silent law that governed the safety of the weak. He pulled the fabric of the rift around him like a heavy, velvet cloak, sinking into a state of active slumber. He would sleep, but he would never be unconscious. He would be the dream that the universe had about itself. Far below, on the healing earth, a young child looked up at a particularly bright star, one that seemed to twinkle with a warm, golden hue unlike any other. The child didn't know that the star was actually a heart, or that the heart belonged to a boy who had once been an orphan, then a hero, and finally a god who chose to be a shield. As the child made a wish, Naruto felt the vibration of that tiny hope in the center of his celestial chest and smiled. The harvest was over, the granaries were full, and for the first time in the history of the stars, the night was truly, safely dark. The transition from a ruler of the void to a fundamental force of the universe was a slow, agonizingly beautiful dissolution. Naruto no longer sat upon a throne of obsidian or bone. He had become the very fabric of the rift itself, his consciousness stretched thin across the dimensions like a golden gossamer web. His physical form, once a vessel for a fox and then a catalyst for a god, had finally vaporized into a sentient nebula of pure, refined chakra. He could feel the spin of every electron in the distant galaxies and the slow, rhythmic cooling of the Earth's core. To the few surviving Otsutsuki scouts lingering in the deep dark of the multiverse, Naruto was no longer a target or a traitor. He was a geographic constant, a great barrier, of golden radiation that incinerated any parasitic intent before it could even formulate a plan. He had become the ultimate paradox, a predator that existed solely to protect the prey. As the centuries bled into millennia, the memory of Naruto Uzumaki on Earth transitioned from history to myth, and finally to a faint, instinctive sense of security that permeated the human soul. The ninja villages had long since evolved, their bloody wars replaced by a global era of technological and spiritual integration, all fueled by the gift Naruto had left behind when he purged the God Tree. He watched from his celestial height as the descendants of his friends reached for the stars, their primitive rockets bypassing the very moon he had once feared. He didn't intervene when they faced their own internal struggles, for he understood now that growth required the friction of life. He only stirred when a cosmic shadow, a remnant of the old hunger, dared to tilt its gaze toward the blue marble. In those moments, the stars would simply align into a terrifying, whisker-marked face, and the shadow would vanish, erased by a silent, golden roar that echoed through the vacuum of space. In the final epic of his watch, the entity that was Naruto reached a state of absolute zero ego. He had processed every memory of the High Council, every scrap of human emotion, and every ounce of Kurama's ancient rage into a singular, crystalline purpose. He realized that his existence was the final seal, the ultimate lock on a door that must never be opened again. He began to draw the edges of the rift inward, folding the Otsutsuki dimension into a microscopic singularity that he held within the center of his translucent chest. He was condensing the entire legacy of his violent kin into a single point of non-existence, effectively deleting the God program from the universe's operating system. As the singularity collapsed, Naruto felt a sensation he hadn't known since he was a boy standing in the rain, a sense of profound, quiet exhaustion. He had finished the task. He had cleaned the garden, and now, it was time for the gardener to rest. The final transformation was not a disappearance, but an integration. Naruto allowed his golden essence to leak out of the rift and back into the natural flow of the universe, not as a god, but as luck, as inspiration, and as the will to endure. He dissolved into the light of the suns and the shadows of the planets, becoming a part of the cycle he had once sought to break. On Earth, in a field that had once been the site of a great war, a single sunflower bloomed in the middle of a harsh winter, its petals a vibrant, defiant orange. A passerby stopped to marvel at it, feeling a sudden, inexplicable surge of hope and a desire to be kind. High above, in the silent, shimmering dark, the last vibration of a celestial heart faded into the background radiation of the cosmos. The pale king was gone, but the boy who wanted to be acknowledged had finally achieved the ultimate recognition. He was everywhere, he was everything, and for the first time in an eternity, the universe was finally at home.